What is up, DTube? So, today I want to talk a little bit about the HEX Citadel. Will it be needed? If you don't know what I'm talking about, what a citadel is, first of all, it is like a fortress that, well, I can Google the definition of a citadel because it's a thing that's highly popular to talk about in the crypto community. A citadel is a fortress, typically one on high ground above a city. Um, a citadel is a core fortified area of a town or city. It may be a castle, fortress, or fortified center. The term is a diminutive of city and thus means little city, so called because it's a smaller part of the city of which it is the defensive core. I like the last part there about defensive core. So Hex is very interesting. That a lot of people got in, so you could make a community around something. Um, People talked a lot about the Bitcoin Citadel, but since it's mainly is rich people that have Bitcoin and not the average guy, and those guys were already rich before, so it seems like Citadel for them is a little bit less relevant. But I think it's interesting with Hex because there's so many small players that got involved with it from very early, and that how Hex is designed in a much better way than Bitcoin. So if you would like 10x Bitcoin's performance of 2 million x, we are up to 10 million x. And what's also interesting here with Hex is this aspect of that people can just hold and earn interest. So they have even more incentive than in Bitcoin to not move it around that much. So then we come up to this Citadel question. Does Hex need a Citadel eventually? So we've seen that it may only take $45 million to get up to $1 Hex. The question is how much people would sell into that. But still, it is kind of interesting when we're dealing with these like mega large numbers eventually, where one person can have maybe $100+ million. It's very interesting, especially in this computing power age, to see how people would interact with that and how the mainstream, also how the mainstream would react to that high market cap Hex would have if $1 Hex was something that eventually happened. How would the public, how would the mainstream react? It's like it's a very interesting question. I mean, the Citadel question, you want like a community around something that so they can kind of defend their own interest if it eventually someone would try to do something. Now the question is what they actually. It gets really interesting once we have these like, let's say $1 hacks, right? It's very interesting. What I think personally, what I think people are going to do is I think people are going to, just as they've done in the past, they are going to diversify in something that looks like it has a lot of potential to do. So what's interesting with Hex was you're never gonna outperform like you're never gonna outperform something new with something old usually, because the new you're getting in from zero price. So there's always gonna be this demand in the market to always find a new thing that starts from zero, and if it just has a potential to do a 10x or a 30x, a lot of people are kind of interested in that. So if you if someone has like $100 million in hex, I can very easily see that they can diversify at least like $30 million of that into other things that may do in the short term do like a 10x or 30x. So all of this is just going to grow, right? And I think that hex is more going to be in demand of a citadel, uh, and it can be like a digital citadel that people just protect their own kind of interests. And you see that already with hex, how they have the most amount of people with faces. This is something that you Bitcoin in 2010, you didn't really have that many faces, and in a way you could say having so many faces and have so many videos and people live streaming and talking about hacks, it kind of is like a digital citadel in many ways. That people are kind of reinforcing a reality that they want to see in the world, trustless interest. It's like and the and it's going to be fascinating to follow how the mainstream react to hex as the price really moves high first, about 1 cent again, and then 10 cents, 30 cents, and it's like you have all these like different levels, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see. I mean, it seems like something would happen, right? Like we have had a lot of gatekeeping a very, very long time. So it's going to be interesting to see if those guys are going to keep on gatekeeping, but it's like it seems like something eventually is going to happen, because it's like, okay, we're already now top 10 crypto and soon top 3 crypto, and then it's like you can't ignore it, you know. um and people, and it's like this is so much better than in the beginnings of Bitcoin, because people have so much more computing power, they have so much better communication tools so they can talk to other people. It's like people can be way more crafty here. People can be way more crafty, and yeah, just because the communication tools, or people are communicating much more now than 10 years ago, it makes this really, really, really interesting. Because let's say someone makes $100 million in hex. I mean, let's say they get like a house or something like that for $1 million. Let's say they get a car for 100K or something like that. I mean, that would just be like 1% of their hex, you know. And and then it becomes really interesting, especially if you have like, so XRP tried to be this massive liquidity network and it kind of failed with that, sure. And what I mean with fail is, well, now the price is like dumping hardcore, but people talk that it would be like $1 trillion liquidity network, but that never really happened. But it seems like if we're gonna have these like massive whales with like $100 million in coins eventually, it's gonna be very interesting to see. Well, big whales then may get like a larger need to move like larger sums between new coins, but who knows? But it can play out in so many different ways. But it all comes down to like the things I look at is first, okay, how are the mainstream reacting eventually? Because eventually they won't be able to ignore something. And how is different companies behaving, and how is yeah, how are different like companies behaving, um, when they see stuff happening, it's going to be fascinating to study. Now, let's say there would be a lot of jealousy. Like, let's say you would see the mainstream have a lot of jealousy and so on. Um, and if there would be maybe a lot of infighting and so on, then maybe people would stop communicating as much. Like, we don't know how this social media thing is going to go. If I mean, 10 years from now on, with artificial intelligence and machine learning doing so much, all that we know is stuff is going to be very different. uh Stuff is going to be very different. um and it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be very different. It all depends the next 10 years, if people are very responsive, um if how engaged they are, or if they just don't care. It's going to be an interesting game to study. But I think Hex has the metrics to be the ultimate cryptocurrency that actually would need like a Citadel. The question is like the question is if all this digital stuff, if it's just gonna remain digital, or if people also gonna do a lot of stuff um, in the physical landscape as well. Uh, I mean, like yeah, buying a house is like one thing, right? But that's like a very small thing. But with these larger sums, like people can buy larger things. Uh, and it's a good question, like globally, how much influence that would have on various things. But the idea of a core fortified area is very interesting. Um, People have done it for centuries, building these large castles, and we built like we now we have nation states and so on. Um, but now we're moving into the next phase of like business leaders and people that can like generate capital. They should become eventually the most influential people in the world, because it's like they're solving a problem, like people need money. So they should eventually become like the most influential people and that people listen to the most. And it's going to be interesting to follow that, to see how that kind of plays out. So yeah, it's it's interesting with communities, digital, to see how it evolves and so on. And yeah, it can play out in so many different ways. But but for example, Bitcoin was just like, it was just a little playful, like it was like the first experiment. uh Ethereum, it got a little bit more serious, and with Hex it's like, now this is actually the real deal. Like, you actually have everything built in that you need, and it just goes automatic. It's just computer code, so people are so much more empowered than with Bitcoin. And it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, because you have all these structures in the world, right? And in digital worlds, eventually everything like is coming together, and people are learning faster from each other. And And yeah, um, so a crypto community or a cryptocurrency that works amazing, does it need? They probably need a community that is very like dedicated, and then that it works like a defensive core, and that yeah, and that they have faces. It's like one of these interesting things with hex. Like people actually have faces. Like that is still in 2020 is like a new concept because yeah, sure, you do have some Bitcoiners like showing their faces, but it's not at the scale of hex. And it was way later. Like most of the people that show their faces with crypto, with Bitcoin, those are only the guys that came in like 2016, 2017. So it's not like usually the original people that was in from the start. So it's interesting to see how something plays out when you have a community that are so active. Like the Hexen community is like super active. They're doing like live streams that are like hours in length, with more than 5 people on the same stream. That is something that no other community has out there, you know. No other crypto community out there has that. So yeah, will Hex eventually need like, will someone try to attack Hex eventually in like a larger way? That is really the question. Like we have only had like nonsense attacks. Um so yeah. So we mainly have like this first year it's mainly been like nonsense attacks. But let's say something would like pass Ethereum or let's say pass Bitcoin, I mean, that would really, people would talk, you know. Maybe they, and it's going to be interesting then to see like the what the conversation would be then. So yeah, it's an interesting topic, citadels. Um, so that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. Have a great day, DTube and Hexicans.